Thank you very much. Delighted to be here and delighted to talk to John. We had a good chat earlier in the week, and he's got a rip-roaring story from hostile takeovers to great innovation and all of the ups and downs and the turmoil and the pain and the beauty of building a business from the ground up. I'll come to all of that and we'll talk about your own journey because I want to frame it initially around your journey. Katrina outlined, I think, the corporate blurb. Just frame it. What exactly is it your company actually does?
Well, crikey, that's well, Aerogen, we're a life science company, so we're involved in, I guess, making better medicines and better treatments for patients. So we lead the world in the area of delivering aerosolized drugs within the hospital environment, particularly within the ICU, where we developed the world's first closed system for aerosolization of drugs to people on ventilators, very sick people. Yeah.
No, it's great. We will come back to some of the pioneering research that you and your team are doing here. I want to take a step back, though, to your own journey, because, lots of people have conventional routes into business. They go to business school, they start off in accountancy or whatever else. You left school at 16.
Yeah, I did. I was born in London. My parents were both Galway people. Come on, Sam. So they went over to England and worked in the 50s. My dad worked out in the construction, and my mother worked as a housemaid or helper, nanny, actually. And they got married there. So we grew up in London, but me and my siblings, we were always made clear by my mum that this was just a temporary thing. We were in London. She always used to say, don't forget, this isn't your home, So we used to come back to Ireland every summer for the whole of the summer, which was wonderful. From baby, every single year, spend it out in Lochgannon there, out in Roscahill, Killannon Parish, and out on the farm, and then, don't know if any of you know Powers Pub in Upderard. Well, that's where the Thatch Pub, as you go into the village, that's where my father was born. His family came from. So to me, it was always a thing of coming back to Ireland. I always considered Ireland was home, and we were, so I suppose I worked towards that and left school at 16, started a job as a draftsman, largely because I liked going out and having fun and what have you, and I liked earning money as well. So I used to work on the building sites at the weekends and what have you with my father's crowd, and so I liked having money in my pocket and decided I'd go out and make my way. And I did night school and what have you. So I left school at 16, but then trained as a draftsman with the big drawing boards before there was CAD systems or anything. So it was all ink and did night school in engineering, and then did distant MBA many years later. So I kind of did it all sort of
just in different orders.
Yeah.
And how did you get into business then? How did you get into it for yourself? Because it's a great story. It's a great journey.
Yeah, I think it was always inclined to be fairly industrialist, sort of thinking about things and trying to do things better and improve things. And I was lucky. I did got my final engineering qualification, so I did a course in robotics and automation. This was really in the early days of robotics, where the PC revolution had just happened. People were seeing PCs in the office. There might be one computer, one PC in the office, and it was a big thing, but then people felt the next wave or the next generation was going to be robotics, and robots would take over the world, kind of thing. It was, this is forward thinking. So I did a course in robotics and advanced automation, and moved from petrochem industry, which I was involved in, to a startup company in London that was developing Europe's first home robot. It was very interesting, and I think it was the name of the company that attracted me. It was called the Original Android Company, So I worked in there. I was the first engineer in the door, which was lucky, because then I got involved in all the pitches to finance groups and what have you.
Raising the money.
Yeah, and so I had no knowledge of that before, and I thought companies existed and you went in and worked and you got paid for your work and that was it. And it was kind of getting into the idea that you actually had to raise capital to deploy it and what have you. So, yeah, I found that all fascinating as well. And so that early startup experience, and there wasn't really venture capital around as we know it today. A lot of the money was funded through merchant banks. And I'll just tell you one story, one of my favourite stories from back then. We developed this robot, and the robot was a scar arm, 6-axis robot. So it had every axis, you know, a human arm and hand, two arms on this thing, and it was like a dialect. And we were working on this presentation for one of the big finance banks in London, and myself and Tim Jones, who was the founder of the company, worked all weekend putting this presentation together, talking about the information bus and how we used it, and it was all this real complex stuff. And of course, this guy came along to the meeting, and he's there in real smart suit and, you know, little hanky and everything. And so Tim started presenting to him, and your man was looking, and I could tell he didn't know what was going on. So after a while, he said, Timothy, old chap, he said, look, this sounds fascinating, he said, but I haven't got a clue what you're talking about. But he said, I'll tell you what, he said, I'll come back in a week's time, and if you can get that thing to pour me a gin and tonic, I'll give you the money. And this is the gospel truth. And so we dropped everything for the next week to train this robot how to come into a room through vision system, triangulation, pick up a bottle of Boost gin with an optic in it, pour it into a glass, and we had a slice of lemon on a stick, and he did it. And your man, true enough, there's the check. You know, off you go, guys, for your next round of finance.
The most expensive gin and tonic
yeah.
ever.
No, but it's amazing when I look now, because I try and help out BioInnovate here in Galway and, you know, startups in medtech, and I see the rigors they go through in terms of diligence from finance groups to put money into them. And I thought this was it, make a gin and tonic and show us that it works. And, you know, it's seemed like easier days.
How did you go from there to launching Aerogen? Was there always a sort of an entrepreneurial grow within you, or did you just fall into it, John?
No, I think there was. I'd worked in, up until the time I worked in the robotics company, I'd worked in bigger companies, and I don't know that I liked it too much, and I preferred a smaller set. And when I get involved to that entrepreneurial situation in robotics, and right at the beginning of it, I knew this is what I needed to be doing, because I'd be quite happy work hours and hours and hours through weekends and everything to get something working properly, whereas in bigger companies that didn't really count for much, you know. And I wanted to do something I could make an impact on, and I suppose, so I needed then to think about my other thing was, apart from working for myself, which I liked the idea of, was the idea of getting back to Ireland to live. So I was trying to think, how am I going to combine the two of these together to come back? And at the time, if people remember, this is going back to 1990, there was a big push in Ireland. The computer, Ireland had been great bringing in the multinationals, and so we had all the sort of digital here in Galway, of course, and there was Wang and all these guys that come over, and computer industry building computers here. And then that was kind of tapering off, you know, and going off to lower cost locations. And so then the Irish government, which I think they've done a great job over many years of this thing of being a tight enough small country, you can actually point the country in the direction of an industry sector. Whereas if you're an old established if you have like Germany or France or UK, they have lots of old industry, whereas we didn't really have that
And
here.
they bet big on pharma, biomed.
Yeah. So they actually took single bets and said, all right, we'll now the one that didn't work out, of course, was aerospace, particularly. Now Ryanair obviously came out of it, which was a fantastic story. But Shannon Aerospace, Team Aer Lingus, all of that. The aerospace industry, if you remember, GPA was the largest aircraft leasing company in the world, and they went to bring it public, and it collapsed on the public offering because no one believed that people would be flying 2 and 3 times a year on holidays and stuff like that. So that will never happen. So GPA had more planes on order than the entire US civil and military air force. So so the aerospace industry collapsed completely. But before that had happened, I was looking to bring back a technology, a joint venture, which I'd worked with a company developing for reducing the weight of cockpit interiors. Now, I don't want to go off on that story too much, but anyhow, it's a great technology.
Well, I think there's probably a book in all the products that you really are a product guy. I'll come to that in a...
Solutions, It's, so this was great. You could reduce the interior weight of the cockpit by about 1/3, which is big because you're flying that and burning fuel as you're flying it backwards and forwards. So we set up a joint venture. We're going to go down to Knock Airport because at the time, the guys down who were running the airport, it was very Fianna Fáil orientated, and the idea was they wanted to set up another industrial free port like Shannon. So this was going to be the first company in to try and set that growing like Shannon. And of course, everyone wanted to put money into it at the time. I remember Aer Lingus were going to invest in it. EI were ready with a big check, and there was lots of interest in it. And then GPA took a nosedive, and the whole industry basically froze. And so it's interesting about timing. Even if you've got great technology, great idea, great people, if your timing just doesn't line up with the stars, it doesn't happen. So at that stage, we lost everything. I'd put anything I had.
Just gone.
Oh, gone. Yeah, I'd sort of remortgaged and house and all that sort of thing to help fund. And we lost everything. And we had, at the time, there was...
What goes on in your mind at that moment?
Yeah, it wasn't good. Now, I tell you, it was because
I'd
moved back to Galway, and we had, at the time there were 3, we got 5 kids, and at the time there were 3 under 5. And literally it was getting to a point there was no grub in the house, nothing in the fridge. So, I mean, it wasn't like there were huge, and in them days, there wasn't great support in that. I didn't look for it. I'd been working since I was 16 and always paid my own way. Yeah. So I didn't want to ask my parents knew, or my wife's parents knew what dire the situation was. They would have helped us, no doubt. But I didn't. Yeah, I was too proud really to go back. And I remember getting a great friend of mine, Charlie Mulligan, here in Galway, knew the situation I was in. He got me a job doing a design for. I always say it was designing tanks for Colonel Gaddafi, but they were irrigation tanks for the great man-made river in Libya. I don't know if anyone knows about that, but it was this huge underground water source, fresh water source out into the desert in Libya, and he piped it all to the villages and towns. He went crazy, obviously, but in his day, he was really very socialist-minded and sort of set up schools and hospitals and all sorts of things. So anyhow, an Irish company, Mercury Engineering, had got the job of putting these tanks in the villages for this water to be pumped into, and they'd fitted these tanks all around Libya. But the problem was this was an ancient water source, and all the sediment and everything was coming down the pipe, and it was a big, I don't know what it was, 10-inch or 12-inch pipe opened, and you basically filled the reservoir or the tank, and they were about the size of the room. And so these were filling up with sediment, and then you'd have to get people to go in and with buckets and bucket all the muck out. And so Charlie got me in front of the CEO of Mercury Engineering, and he said, do you think you could, we've got a problem here. We don't know what we're going to do now. And so I said, oh yeah, I think I can solve this. Now, I'd never done civil engineering apart from digging holes and picks and shovels on building sites. But I thought I had to do it because I didn't have any other work or anything. So I actually designed this retrofit inner tank that dropped in and filtered out all the sediment, so you could go up a ladder and just clear it out of this little tank, and it had a big ball cock which would automatically turn the water on and off. Now, I won't tell you where I thought of the idea of this, but you might be able to guess. So anyhow, it worked, and they got retrofitted all over Libya, and the check, I always say the check came through from Colonel Gaddafi, but it was from the wherever it was, Ministry of wherever.
But it got you back on your feet.
Got me back on my feet again, and paid off the bills and what have you. And then I did some other design work, individual contract design work, and then my wife said, you know, John, maybe it's time you should get a proper job again. And so I thought, well, things weren't great in the economy at that time, and a job came up at what was Puritan Bennett, which was an American company that was the world leader at the time in life support ventilation. So I got a job in there, and then shortly after getting the job, they landed a project in Galway to develop a new ICU ventilator from scratch. So that was really what got me in the ventilator mode. Now, to be quite honest, I only intended to go and work in there for about 2 years. I put in my mind, I said, I'll work in here. Medical's the next wave coming in Ireland. Aerospace is gone. Computers are gone. Robotics aren't there yet. So I said, yeah, so I need to find out about this medtech world and how stuff gets developed there. So we landed on this ICU, and an ICU ventilator is an incredible piece of equipment because, you know, of all the pieces of kit and sophisticated kit in the hospital, the ICU vent does what it says on the tin. It's a life support. You know, if the ventilator doesn't work, the patient potentially can die. So it was really intense development. John O'D, who's here in Galway as well with his company, we worked together on that, and we got this new vent out to market, and it was hugely successful. But I stayed nearly 4.5 years to get that done. And at the end of it, I was thinking, where am I going to go next? They talked about myself and John moving over to California to head up groups in the States, and neither of us wanted to. But I got some work off them doing contract work. But one of the things they discovered with this new vent, they thought inhalers, you know, like puffers, MDIs, if anyone with asthma. Yeah, they thought they were going to be the products that would be used on ventilators going forward, and you wouldn't need nebulization. But as it turns out, they're not really ideally suited for ventilators, because if you imagine a ventilator tubing maybe 20 mil diameter and it's humidified, and then you open a little port and you squirt the MDI in. I mean, anybody who is used to those things, and you know you've got to catch it right with the breath. Well, you spray it into a wet circuit and it exits at 30 meters per second. It just rains out all over the circuit. None of it gets to the patient. So anyhow, there was a need to get a nebulizer for this new ventilator, and also one in the States they developed at the same time, and they asked me whether I could do it. And that was really the first time I looked at I knew nothing about nebulizers or aerosol drug delivery, so I seen all the problems. I got a quick fix for them in an ultrasonic, but I knew there had to be a better way of doing it, and that's really was the catalyst for Aerogen.
And so the logistics, and I want to move on to a couple other points, but the logistics then of getting it off the ground. You might give us a whistle-stop tour, but I do want you to talk about being caught in the middle of a stock market hostile takeover.
So I guess I started trying to develop I was above a butcher shop. I got a room above a butcher shop out in my Cullen out the road there, and that's where the company's set up. And it was great, apart from in the summer when all the carcasses were thrown out the back and the flies would come in the window and everything.
Just when you have this sense of a cutting
edge.
edge.
Yeah, honestly. And then it always smelled like barbecue because he'd burn all the carcasses, right? So it was like desperate. But yeah, so so anyhow, I'd set up the company and I'd got work doing consultancy work for Puritan Bennett in California. So that was bringing some money in. But in the back of my head, I was looking at a solution to this problem when I saw how bad drug delivery was for ventilated patients. Because I thought, this is really strange, having spent millions on developing a new ICU ventilator, and that was Puritan Bennett, which are now Medtronic, but GE, Philips, all these companies spent huge amounts of money developing these ventilator platforms, which of course came to the fore during COVID, but no one had concentrated on the drug delivery part of it. And so most people who end up, or a big percentage of people in ICUs anywhere in the world are there because of respiratory condition, and they're on the ventilator and respiratory, keeping them, breathing. Yet they could have the infection in their lung, Pseudomonas, pneumonia, whatever, yet the treatment is through IV drugs. And, anyone who knows about targeted drug delivery these days is talked about a lot, is oncology in particular, right? You don't want to pump loads of drug into people's system to get to one point. If you can get the drug to the point of infection, that's what you should be trying to do. So it was just that the aerosol methods have been so poor up till then. And so I thought there has to be a better way of doing this. And I was working on various technologies. And then an old colleague of mine out in California said, John, he said, there's a company here in California, in Silicon Valley. They were working on micro combustion engines for miniature aircraft. It's really weird. So like drones and things, right? So he said, but they've changed. They pivoted, as the term pivot now is used all the time.
Yeah, it's normally followed by an insolvency proceedings.
Yeah, very good. So they pivoted towards drug delivery, and at the time there was a big push on for inhaled insulin, because again, if you think of people who have to inject for insulin, if you could avoid that, it'd be a great solution. So anyhow, this company some money had gone into them. I talked to their head engineer, the founder of the business, Ehud. He was a lovely guy, and he said, well, I don't know anything about drug delivery or anything like that. He said, I was trying to work on the combustion engines, but they told me there's no money in that anymore. So he said, but I told him what I was trying to do. He said, well, come over and see us, and we'll have a chat. And so I flew over to California, met Ehud, got on great. Two engineers, two innovation sort of guys, so we really hit it off. And, I had some ideas what he could do with this. And so all well and good, but then we met the CEO who they brought in, and this guy, I wanted to try and get a license for the technology to work with them, but get a license for acute care, because I knew I could take the basic concept, turn it into this drug delivery system for the problem that was in ventilators. So anyhow, that was fine until we met this guy, and he was your typical sort of VC-driven California dude, and he's looking at me and he said, well, this guy from above a butcher shop.
One man in a butcher shop.
And you want a license, and you got no money, and you want a license. He said, oh no, he said, I'm sorry, John. He says, all I can see written across your forehead is risk. And so I said, no. And I tried explaining to him that if I could take the technology, I'd work on it with his team. And I think I could bring something to that, get it used in the ICU, which would then make it more acceptable where they were going. So it made sense, but not to him. So I was very disappointed, flew back to Ireland, worked on some other ideas I had around doing it. But at the back of my mind, I knew this technology. It's like a sieve technology, and you vibrate the sieve, a bit like flour sieve or soil sieve. And it has no degrading of the drug. It's very gentle, and I knew this was a great solution. It didn't add flow of gas into the system, so you.
This is what you wanted.
This is what I wanted. So anyhow, he phones me back up about 2 months later, and he said, John, he says, I've got good news. And I said, what? He said, that jerk's been sacked. He said, so I said, oh, brilliant. So he said, now I've talked to the lady who's taken over, Jane Shaw, and he said, I told her about what you wanted to do, and she's really interested. So back on the plane over to California again. And I literally sat down in front of Jane and explained the situation. And I said, look, Jane, I've got no money, I can't, but I think I can do something with this and work and help, and I'll bring something to you guys for it. And she just said, yeah, I think what you're talking about is very necessary, and we'll support you. And so we shook hands there and then got a deal signed. And within, I think, about 9 months of working with them, she said, John, what you guys are doing in Ireland is so good. Let's join together. And that they were called Aerogen. So we became Aerogen Ireland at that point. And then really quickly, this was around 2000, the markets were really volatile at the time. And they got advised to go public. They hadn't intended going public. So we did the roadshow. I did the roadshow in Europe with Jane, and we raised a lot of money and went public.
How much?
Well, we went out at about 300 million valuation. Now I only had a small bit of it, but
that's still a small bit. 300. It's not that.
Yeah, but you know, you can't just take the money. It's the money's going in to fund the business. So anyhow, that all went well. But then the markets, if anyone remembers, around the end of November 2000, we went out, and I think we were one of the last companies to go public at that time before the massive crash. And NASDAQ went from 5,000 points to below 2,000 in a matter of weeks, months. This company, because they were funding an insulin program in California, it's very expensive. The clinical trials were like hundreds of millions. And so the money ran out. When this is again serendipity or whatever you call it, but when the bubble burst in .com at that time, the markets just shifted, because .com was this story that, you know, the business doesn't make money right now, but it will make lots and lots of money down the road. And people bought into that. And then when .com burst, what it brought down was anything that had long-term paybacks. And all the biotech industry that had nothing to do with .com and was largely built on good science crashed completely, because now the market went from investing now for a long-term return into wanting really fast return on investments. And so quite without nothing you could do about it.
And it all got grouped together, technology. It's just
totally. And like we were progressing the technology and the insulin work, and everything was getting good results and what have you. Yet the price was falling. And then we got acquired by a sort of hostile takeover, which really I didn't like. It was a bigger pharma company bought us. And suddenly I found myself, from wanting to be working for myself, I'm now part of this big pharma company in California, which I thought, oh no, this is a disaster. And so I negotiate, that was around 2005, and there were a couple of assets we were working on in Galway, particularly, that they wanted. And really what they wanted to do was shut down Galway. They didn't like the idea of the acute care stuff because they thought it was too risky. And wanted to basically get what we were working on transferred into another area, and it would have shut. So I went over and convinced them that wasn't a good idea, because we were already doing work with GE, Medtronic, Philips, all these guys, and they wouldn't be too happy if we stop, you know. So I negotiated basically to buy the business back out. So it was really going round in circle, from starting up above the butcher shop, raising the money myself, bootstrapping the business, getting acquired, going public, hostile takeover, to then a leverage buyout. And I leveraged the buyout back on them. So I said, they wanted money for it. And I said, all right, well, I haven't got money, but you've got money. So what we'll do is I'll buy it as a debt. So I leveraged it back on the company. And I said, I'll repay you the money over the next number of years. And we repaid it pretty quick. And from that day on, that was end of 2007, 2008, I said, right, what's going to happen here with this company is we are never going to need debt from anyone from here on in. And from that, I think we made about 30 grand profit that year. And every year since, we've always been profitable and we've never needed external money.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Just on that, so I think anyone who's been listening, it's a great story, but you keep on, when you get this buzz in your eye when you start talking about products and gadgets and widgets and whatnot, how do you balance that sort of being an engineer, a product guy, with building a business, with being the guy in the suit with the cravat as well, or whatever?
Yeah. I think, I don't wear cravats, mind you, but no, I think, Ian, it's a good question, because there's often this, I think it's a misconception that if you're, they like, a lot of finance world likes to put the innovator, techie guy in this sort of, oh yeah, you know, he's they're sort of all ideas and all this, but really you need the big finance boys to figure out how to run the business. And I was fortunate that I got exposed to that, you know, your man with the check for pouring a gin and tonic very early. And I thought, you know, these guys aren't all that smart at all, really, a lot of them. And I thought, I don't need, you know, yeah, sure, you can get advice from them. A lot of them are nice, good people. I'm not knocking the finance world, but I just thought, I don't need to have someone else telling me how to do that. You know, we get bored. We've got a good board. Bernard Collins was who set up Boston here in Galway and had Boston Scientific. Bernard's been on the board, and I had Charlie Mulligan, who'd set DEC up here in Galway. So I had good guys that knew stuff, so I guess I was quite happy. Whether it's a control thing or something, but I didn't want to lose control of running the business or the technology, so I kind of keep a foot in both camps. Yeah.
So how big is the business now?
Well, I mean, in terms of people, we're over 400 now. We had about 100 people in Shannon that worked for Molex in Shannon, who'd been there 40 years, and then they decided they were going to shut down just before COVID. And it was a disaster. Yeah. And they manufactured, we had all our automation equipment in there for manufacturers. So we were very lucky again. The CEO of Molex is a guy called Joe Nelligan, Irish-American. So I flew out when I heard it, they were shutting, to meet him over in Chicago, and we had a few beers and a steak and what have you. And I was telling him he said, oh, we can't leave you in the lurch on any of this, so we'll try and work something out. So we, in fact, in the end, bought, we took over part of the building. We leased part of the building off them, about half it, and we took on about 100 of the staff. So for about 400, between Galway, Parkmore, and Shannon, and then Dangan, we have all our R&D and labs and science, engineering, and then we have about 150 people overseas in different locations around the world.
So I want to marry this, because you said at the start, John, you said you preferred a small company as opposed to working in a big one. How do you keep the sense of culture within the business?
God, that's a great question. And we've been working on that just very, very recently, trying to figure this out, because when there was 40 or 50 people, I knew everybody. I knew their wives, their kids. I knew everyone in the company, and we all went out together, whether they were in America or wherever, and it was very close, intimate company. But then, as you say, you get bigger and bigger, and suddenly you see people sitting at desks in the office in Galway, and I think, I don't know who that person is even, and what are they doing, and so
who hired them?
Yeah.
Who's paying them?
Yeah, it's kind of, and I never really wanted. I was always about being the best at what we did, and being the first in the world at what we did. That was my drivers, never to create a big organisation. So it does worry me a bit that it gets too big. You can't have that drive and culture through the business and honesty of the way we do work. So we have embarked recently, and because we have an office in India, we have an office in Dubai, we have a couple of offices in the States, we have an office in Japan, we have an office in Germany, France, small offices, but different cultures and what have you, people. So we've set up a group and worked through recently this sort of culture and values within the company. And rather than where I've been in companies before, the big multinationals, what they do is they bring in some consultants and they, pay them a load of money and they say, this is what our values are. And all right. So, and I always said, the thing I think about the multinational world, my view of it was that they keep using this word family, and you're a part of the family until they decide to lay off everybody in one location, and then you're an orphan, right? But very quickly. So I didn't like that. I didn't buy into it very much. And so it was important to me that when it came to culture and values, that it was actually the culture and values that the staff decided were the culture and values that the company worked to, and we adopted those as four values within the business.
Okay.
And
COVID,
yeah.
So you're growing, you're scaling. Obviously, COVID, while caused enormous suffering for so many, but an opportunity to show what your company could do at the same time.
Yeah, it was a very difficult time, obviously, for people who were sick. It was a terrible time, and awful things happened with people during that period. And when it first started off, I'd been invited to the White House to buy EI for the St. Patrick's Day
That's right.
Shamrock event. Now, I had absolutely no interest in meeting George Bush. Well, sorry, Donald Trump. No, yeah, Donald Trump. But I thought this would be smart to get to the White House. And I was asked by the government, so I thought, yeah, I'll go. And then I flew out, and I kept saying to my wife, but this will be cancelled. Italy, there were bodies in the streets in Italy, in refrigeration units. And I said, this can't go ahead. But America, under him, at the time, he thought, oh, we don't have a problem, And so anyway, I flew out, and the night before we had the American-Irish ball in Washington. Nancy Pelosi spoke at it very elegantly, but then it got cancelled because he suddenly decided it's here and we've got it. And then he said, and all flights anywhere in the world are cancelled. And I thought, this sucks. I've just flown out for the day before, and now I'm going to be stuck in Washington, And then he said, changed it an hour or two later and said, apart from to Ireland and the UK, for some reason. It must have to do with golf or something, I reckon. But anyhow, so I managed to get back with Aer Lingus, but it was total mayhem then. It was like we received orders in...
You could continue to trade, obviously.
Yeah. Well, we had to. And I mean, actually, that was one of the problems. I was ringing the government and saying, listen, because they were saying everybody stay at home. I'm saying, we can't stay at home. If we stay at home, we won't be able to produce the products that they need for people on life support ventilation. And how's that going to work out? So it was really, well, nobody knew, in fairness, how to deal with it, right? And so it's the first pandemic for an awful long time. And so we kept going to work. So actually, when things were shutting down, Aerogen was ramping up massively. And all our guys I have so much pride in the young people who went in and manned sort of on the production lines before vaccines were available to any. And a lot of people did get sick, and some of them ended up in hospital as well, and people with long COVID. But it was like, what else can we do? We can't all sit at home. And then the problem was a lot of the suppliers, of parts had shut, and we had to get them opened and get them producing parts for us. And then the next problem was with all these orders. I think we received in 3 weeks the equivalent of about 9 months' orders from the multinationals, GE, Philips, Medtronic, all these guys. We had to go back to them and say, listen, guys, if we supply you everything, we won't have anything for anyone else. And you can't I know what's in them. You can't make enough ventilators even to do this. And so we kind of rationed product out. But I'm very proud of the fact that throughout COVID, we never shut We continued to ship product to nearly 80 countries, I think, and we never refused any country, you know, and that was what was happening. And there was big, in parts of Europe, you know, where they basically said, well, no medical products coming out.
Country,
and so we kept shipping everywhere, and it was difficult because you had to ship smaller cargo flights. Of course, went through the roof in price because we were used to shipping in the hold of normal civil aircraft. But anyhow, we managed to get through it, and I honestly think that we didn't leave a hospital or a patient without product through that time.
We were speaking just before we came out, and you were talking us through some of the amazing work that your company is looking at for the future and the impact that it can have, particularly around children who are born premature. You might just explain, it's not a business, but I think it's fascinating what you're doing.
Yeah, well, there's probably two really exciting projects. One that came totally out of on the back of COVID, and you know, it's like any crisis is a great place for invention.
Yeah, innovation.
And we got contacted by a vaccine company, said, listen, we've got a problem. We can produce 500 million doses of vaccine at 0.5 ml injectable, but we need to produce billions. And we can't get the plants geared up to do that. And they had taken our equipment and looked at aerosolizing the vaccine and had early success and thought this might be worth doing. But they wanted to know how cheap we could. Now, you couldn't make it cheaper than a needle and injection. But what we developed was the world's first inhaled vaccine station. And kind of the idea behind that came to me from being at the coffee van. The one place that stayed open all through COVID was the coffee van, the pink van in my Cullen. Brilliant place. Lovely people run it. And so I'd go there in the morning. There'd be nothing on the road, but they'd be there, and go there, get a cup of coffee and a sandwich to bring to work. And I was thinking, if we could aerosolize into a container that could be thrown away, we wouldn't use one, because you couldn't have contact between the device and the patient because of cross-infection. So if you could aerosolize quickly enough into a container, it's a bit like the aerosols stays in suspension, if you like, for a while, and then gradually it settles, like a pint of Guinness, I often think, you know, the bubbles settle down eventually. So if you could aerosolize it quick enough, give it to someone, they could take an inhalation, so one breath, you could do it. So we developed this system, and it is the world's first inhaled vaccine station. They tried it out on their trials, and it works, and they've found that they only had to use 1/5 of the dose. So instead of being 0.5 mLs of vaccine, they only needed 0.1, and the 0.1 ml had a greater immunicity effect than 0.5. So that meant immediately you can vaccinate far more people and cheaper. So this is now going for, it's in for final approval, and it will be used for boosters, as well as in some parts of the world where they still don't have vaccine. So that's one.
Yeah.
That one, it was great. We liked being world's first and stuff. And the other one was the big challenge, having known about ventilation and drug delivery and ventilation, the most challenging patient to ventilate is the prem baby, because they're tiny, right? And they have immature airways. So how do you get aerosol into a prem baby? Very difficult. And there's one drug. It's a protein phospholipid called surfactant, which is it's like a lubricant of the lung. And so when you see prem babies and they're in incubator and you see them breathing, they're breathing like this, right? And that's because they can't expand their lungs to allow the alveoli are constricted, because this protein is turned on by the body as you get to full gestation. But if they're born prem, this isn't present in their lungs. So their lungs are incredibly stiff, and you can't just blast their lungs open, otherwise you cause huge trauma. So what was found about 40 years ago, they found that if they took surfactant from the lungs of calves or pigs and distilled it, they could pour this into the lung of the prem baby, and this would work and allow the alveoli to open and close and allow blood gas exchange. And so the breathing would ease, the work of breathing as it's known would ease in the baby. And unfortunately, a lot of prem babies get exhausted because they're trying to breathe so rapidly, and you can't get the energy into them. And that's how, you know, a lot of fatalities in prems are because of that. So surfactant was a major step forward in neonatology. But the problem with it, it's a bit like cream, it's constituency. And so the way they deliver it is, when I saw it the first time, again, it was, we need a solution for this because it seems really barbaric. You know, they've got to basically pry open the airway and put a tube down. And these babies are so tiny and their airways are so immature that it's very damaging. And then you pour this stuff in and bag it, you know, to try and you, without choking the baby while you're doing it, shake it around and pour it out. You know, it's terribly crude, but it has huge impact in mortality rates in terms of. So it's the hardest. It's unfortunate because it's like a soap, and if you think of like fairy liquid or something, and if you agitate it, it froths. And the problem is, if you try aerosolize and surfactant, that's exactly what it does. It bubbles and froths.
But
and
you're getting there, though.
Yeah, but no one had been able to aerosolize it without it frothing and bubbling, so it would clog as it tries to go down. So we developed the next generation of a technology, of our core technology, that could aerosolize tiny droplets, like, you know, two micron droplets, and billions of them in tiny droplets that would bounce off one another and travel down into the lung. And basically, we have that now in clinical trials in phase 2B in America. We're approaching the end of that trial, be the end of this year. If that's successful, we'll know by the middle of next year. And then we'll start our pivotal trial, which is the last trial to go to market. But this, above anything to me, would be, this would be the most fantastic thing, because it would have, I mean, our products are used for very sick people in ICUs on life support. And we've obviously had, we've made like 15 million systems since we started. So there's a lot of people around today who wouldn't be. But probably, if you look at the hardest drug to deliver, that's the surfactant, and you look at the most difficult subject to deliver to, and that's the prem baby. So to be able to do that would again be something that we would feel that we really accomplished.
Okay. Now, I was going to ask a question about money, but it seems a bit incongruous to do it after that, but I'll come back to it. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I just want to see, does anybody in the audience want to put a question to John before I ask him about his retirement or selling plans?
Oh.
I just see a lady there, yeah, hi. You'll see a mic there, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm fascinated by the whole thing, and I have two very unrelated questions. The first one is, did lighter cockpits ever become built?
Oh, no, the cockpits never, the technology never got utilised in the end. It was a great shame. I often think it would be worth going back to bringing it forward again, but I haven't got the time. Yeah. And
the second one is just sort of, I don't know if it's only me, but I'd be interested in a little more detail on how your nebulizers work in ventilators.
Yes.
Is it the component part? How do you get the drugs into them?
Okay. I'll try and explain it quickly. So the big trick with aerosolizing drugs, as we found out through various degrees of science, is you need the particles to be a particular size. If you produce large particles, a bit like an aftershave or a perfume, they're large particles, and the idea of them, you spray them and they rain out on the surface and deposit. Whereas, of course, with an aerosol, where you're trying to aerosolize either at the nose or in the mouth to the patient, you want those particles to travel down through the airway system and get out into the branches of the lung and deposit the drug there. So science has told us you need 1 to 5 microns. Those are the particles that will travel. If they're much bigger than 5 microns, the particles hit each other and they grow like a snowball, and then they'll rain out. But if they're 5 microns, they have enough surface tension that if they hit each other, they bounce off each other like rubber balls. So we had to develop a technology that created centered around 3 to 4 micron droplets. So we developed it's like a sieve, but its diameter is about 5 millimeters in diameter, so very small. But into that small metal plate, we have about 1,000 holes, and each of those holes is sized so that liquid, when it passes through, will create droplets of the right size. And we vibrate that plate 128 kilohertz. So, you know, for the engineers, that's 128,000 times a second. And it acts like a sieve for soil or flour. So every time you vibrate it, you get an array of droplets come through. But we just do it an awful lot, 128,000 times a second. So you get this fine mist of aerosol that then is carried down through the breathing tube, down either through nasal or through an intubated, down into the lung and deposits the drug. So that's how it works.
When the patient is on the ventilator, how do you get the drug to that?
So into the tube set that the patient is on, there'd be an adapter, and you plug our nebulizer into that adapter, and basically you open the back of it, which doesn't open the circuit for fugitive emissions. You pour the drug in, wet the liquid drug in there, shut it, turn on the electronics, and then it starts aerosolizing it. So it keeps doing this vibration, and then every time the air is delivered to the patient's lung, the aerosol goes with it.
Okay. A very quick question, because
John,
I gave a commitment we'd be done on time.
Yeah. You mentioned timing was important for product development. I'm just wondering, did location make a big difference to Aerogen in being in a medical device cluster? Like, would it, and how important would you have ranked, like, being near a medical device cluster?
Well, we're over 20 years now, the company, 22 years, I think. So there wasn't really there was the starts of a cluster, if you like. CR Bard had come to Galway, and then Medtronic, well, not Medtronic, it was Puritan Bennett. So a few were starting to come here of the multinationals. I think it is tremendously important for future growth of Irish indigenous medtech, because you need the skills that the multinationals train and teach people, the knowledge that they impart, that you can then take into formation of smaller companies. So I think it's very important, but I think we've got to realise that Ireland isn't a traditional medtech cluster. If you look at the medtech cluster in, say, Germany, Cambridge, Boston, Silicon Valley, that has grown up indigenously over many, many, many years and through different technologies, whereas the Irish medtech cluster has been forced. You know, it's multinationals come here building things, and then we managed to create our own industry around that. So it's not a traditional one that's grown from root upwards. That's why it's still very much predominated by the US multinationals, which is great to have them here. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for it. But, you know, we need to obviously create more of our own companies. Yeah.
Finally and briefly, were you, Katrina mentioned at the start, you're not tempted to sell, you're not tempted to float, you're comfortable where you are?
No, I've had an experience of floating a company,
Right.
and whilst it seemed great fun at the time, the reporting for public companies is really difficult. You know, it's a tremendous burden. So I don't know that I particularly want to do that. Who knows? You can never say never. But and also, you know, we would have lots of approaches to buy the company, but I don't really have an interest in it. I want to grow the business. I mean, there's no need for us to sell. We're not broke. We're making money. We're doing all right, and I don't see a necessity. I mean, I think, unfortunately, the way medtech has gone, it's so expensive to develop, and of course Europe is making it worse with this new MDR. But it's so expensive to get a product to market these days, even compared to 20 years ago, that you have to borrow huge amounts of money or have investors in. And of course, the investors want to sell, whereas we have one investor of any size, that's Temasek. They're the sovereign wealth fund of Singapore. But they don't have an interest in selling. They want to just see the asset appreciate. So it works well. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, John. We wish the projects that you're working on have had a great impact, and the ones you're bringing to market hopefully will have a great impact on so many people going forward. So it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian.